In 1955, an American electrician would not leave the house without a knife the Army designed for war. Today, most tradesmen could not name it. Number 7 had a feature so clever, merchant sailors were not allowed to ship out without it. And number 2 sold in more American hardware stores than any hammer. These 20 knives built the suburbs, wired the cities, and shod the horses still pulling milk wagons. Hit subscribe because your grandfather's pocket knew things ours forgot. Let's start the countdown at number 20. Number 20, the Sodbuster. No bolsters, no shield, no polish, just a plain handle, a single carbon steel blade, and a price under $1 at any hardware store in America. The Sodbuster was the knife of men who did not have time to baby their tools. Farmhands sliced baling twine with it. Masons scraped mortar off their trowels with it. Truck drivers opened crates and cut tarp rope with it. The pattern came over from Germany, where they called it a clodbuster, and American cutlery companies stamped them out by the hundreds of thousands. The blade took an edge fast on any whetstone and did not complain when you lost it in a hayfield, because for 89 cents you just bought another one. Men wore the blade down to a sliver over years of sharpening, and you could read a man's work history in the shape of his sodbuster. A blade worn into a hook meant rope work. A blade worn straight meant scraping. When farms consolidated and twine gave way to plastic wrap and machinery, the Sodbuster faded from the counter displays. Collectors hunt them now, paying $50 for a knife that was designed to be disposable. The men who carried them would have laughed. Number 19, the Hawkbill. That wicked curved blade, shaped like a talon, made grown men nervous who did not understand it. But the Hawkbill was never a weapon, it was a pulling knife. Orchard workers hooked it behind a branch and drew it toward themselves, and the curve trapped the wood so the blade could not slip away. Landscapers cut sod with it. Carpet men used it before hook blades came in cartridges, and linemen loved it for stripping insulation because the point dug in and the belly did the work. A Camillus Hawkbill cost about $1.25 in 1955, and in the citrus groves of Florida and the apple country of Washington State, a man's Hawkbill hung on his belt from first light until dark. The blade sharpened on the inside curve, which took skill with a round stone, and old orchard hands could put an edge on one in 90 seconds flat. Utility knives with replaceable hook blades killed the Hawkbill in most trades. Why sharpen when you can snap in a new blade for a nickel? But the men who pruned 10,000 trees a season will tell you a Hawkbill never once needed a blade change halfway up a ladder. Number 18, the linoleum knife. Walk into any hardware store in 1955, and there it hung by the register. A short, curved, fixed blade riveted into a hardwood handle. Price around 75 cents. The post-war housing boom laid millions of square feet of linoleum, and every floor layer in America scored and trimmed it with this exact knife. The curve let the point stay buried in the material while the handle stayed above your knuckles, so you could pull a 9-foot cut along a straight edge without the blade wandering. Kitchen floors, bathroom floors, church basements, diner counters. The linoleum knife trimmed them all. Floormen sharpened them on the job with a pocket stone, and a good installer could freehand a curve around a toilet flange that fit like it grew there. Housewives borrowed the knife for everything from cutting cardboard to opening feed sacks, which is why so many surviving examples turn up in kitchen drawers instead of toolboxes. Vinyl tile, adhesives, and the snap blade utility knife pushed it aside through the 60s and 70s. Hardware stores still stock a version today, but ask the young clerk what it is for and watch him guess. In 1955, every man in the store knew. Number 17, the cotton sampler. In the warehouses of Memphis, Dallas, and New Orleans, cotton was money, and money got graded by hand. The cotton sampler carried a long, slim, single-bladed knife made for one job, slashing through the burlap and steel-banded jute wrapping of a 500-pound bale so a classer could pull a fist of fiber from deep inside. That sample decided the price of the whole bale. Staple length, color, trash content, all judged by eye and fingertip in rooms lit by north-facing skylights because north light showed cotton's true color. The knife had to be long enough to reach clean fiber, thin enough to slide between bands, and tough enough to do it 400 times a day. Companies like Robeson and Schrade made dedicated sampler patterns, and a classer's knife was as personal as his signature. A good classer earned more than a bank manager, and his knife never left his pocket. Then came instrument testing. Machines began measuring fiber in the 1960s, high-volume classing took over completely by the 1980s, and the skylit classing rooms went dark. The cotton sampler knife vanished with the profession itself, a tool orphaned by a machine that never needed to touch the cotton at all. Number 16, the timber scribe. Here's a knife most Americans have never seen, and yet it once marked half the lumber in the country. The timber scribe, or race knife, looked like a stubby folding knife with a strange curled tip, like a tiny gouge bent into a hook. Drag that hook across the end grain of a log and it carved a clean, permanent groove. Log scalers used it to mark board footage on timber floating down to the mill. Coopers marked barrel staves so the same barrel went back together after repairs. Dock checkers scribed tally marks into crates and beams. Ink washed off in the rain and chalk rubbed away in transit, but a scribed mark lasted as long as the wood did. A timber scribe cost about $1.50, and in the logging camps of Maine, Oregon, and the Upper Peninsula, the scaler's scribe was an instrument of commerce, because his marks were the numbers men got paid on. Lumber crayons, stamps, and stencils slowly replaced it, and by the 70s, the timber scribe was a curiosity. Antique dealers today misidentify them constantly, listing them as leather tools or surgical instruments. The men who could read a scribed log at a glance are nearly all gone. Number 15, the cobbler's knife. Every town in America had a shoe repair shop in 1955, more than 60,000 of them nationwide, and everyone ran on a square point shoe knife that cost about 40 cents. It looked like nothing. A flat blade, a plain handle, no guard, no lock. But watch a cobbler use one and you saw 20 years of skill compressed into a wrist. He skived leather down to a feathered edge, trimmed a new sole flush around a shoe in one continuous pass, and cut heel lifts freehand faster than a machine could be set up. The knife lived on the bench next to the oilstone, and a cobbler touched up the edge dozens of times a day, wearing the blade down until it was a thin sliver of steel and then simply reaching for a new one. Kids waiting for their school shoes watched the shavings curl off the sole like wood off a plane. Then shoes got cheap. Imports and synthetic soles made repair cost more than replacement, and the shops closed by the thousands through the 60s and 70s. Fewer than 5,000 cobblers remain in America today, and the 40-cent knife that resold the nation sits forgotten in a drawer of a shop that is now a phone store. Number 14, the farrier's hoof knife. It is easy to forget that in 1955, horses were still working in America. Milk wagons in Baltimore ran behind horses into the 60s. Junk dealers, small farmers, Amish communities, ranches, and city stables kept hundreds of thousands of working animals, and every one of them needed a farrier. His hoof knife had a curved blade ending in a tight loop, and with it, he pared away dead sole and trimmed the frog before nailing on a shoe. The loop tip cleaned out the tight commissures beside the frog, where a straight blade could not reach. A farrier bought his knife for about $1.75, then reshaped and resharpened it until it fit his hand and his angle of attack exactly. He worked bent double under the half a ton of animal, and a dull knife meant wrestling instead of cutting, so the knife got stropped between every hoof. Trucks and tractors retired the working horse through the 50s and 60s, and the farrier trade shrank to a fraction of its size. It survives today, serving pleasure horses, and the hoof knife survives with it. But the sight of a farrier's wagon working a city street, knife and rasp and anvil aboard, is gone forever. Number 13, the head knife. Now we come to the oldest design on this list, The leatherworker's head knife, that half-moon blade on a short center handle, appears in Egyptian tomb paintings 4,000 years old, and in 1955, it was still the master tool of every saddle shop, harness shop, and belt maker in America. The rounded blade cut leather with a rocking push instead of a drag, which meant no stretching, no ragged edge, one clean pass through skirting, leather a quarter-inch thick. A saddler steered it around curves by rolling the edge, cut straight lines by pushing the point, and skived thick hide down to nothing with the flat of the blade. An Osborne head knife cost around $3, and apprentices spent their first year learning to sharpen it before they were trusted to cut anything that mattered. Harness shops were already dying in 1955 as tractors finished off the horse trade, and the saddle shops consolidated westward. Clicker presses and strap cutters took over production work. The head knife never fully disappeared because nothing cuts leather better, and custom makers still swear by it, but the neighborhood harness shop with its wall of hides and its smell of neat's foot oil vanished from American towns within a generation. Number 12, the banana knife. Here's where things get strange. In the ports of New Orleans, Mobile, and Charleston, entire crews of longshoremen carried a knife most of America never knew existed. Banana boats arrived from Honduras and Guatemala carrying fruit on the stalk, whole 90-pound stems of it, and the men who broke them down carried short, curved banana knives to cut the hands of fruit free. The work ran on speed. A gang could empty a ship in hours, knives flashing, fruit moving down conveyor lines into rail cars, and every man kept one eye open for the tarantulas and snakes that rode north in the stems. Old dock hands told stories of spiders the size of a fist dropping out of a stalk onto the man below, and the banana knife handled that problem too. The knives cost about $1 and got sharpened to death within a season. Then the industry changed everything. Growers began boxing bananas at the plantation in the early 1960s. Containerization swallowed the ports, and the banana gangs with their curved knives and their spider stories dissolved almost overnight. Today, the banana knife is so forgotten that collectors argue about what the surviving examples even are. Number 11, the melon knife. Before the supermarket, produce came with proof. The corner grocer and the produce man at the city market carried a long, thin-bladed melon knife, and when a customer doubted a watermelon, he plugged it. One deft cut, a neat triangular core drawn out on the blade, the red flesh shown to the customer, the plug pressed back in place. Sold. The knife was slim, so the plug came out clean, long enough to reach the heart of a 30-pound melon, and sharp enough to do it in 3 seconds while the customer watched. Produce men also used it to trim lettuce butts, cube samples of cantaloupe, and cut the twine on crates from the terminal market. Companies made dedicated melon tester patterns, and a produce man's knife rode in a slim pocket sheath behind his apron. Self-service supermarkets ended the ritual. Nobody plugs a melon for you at a chain store, and by the 70s, the practice survived only at roadside stands and farmers markets. The melon knife became a curiosity in cutlery catalogs and then disappeared from them entirely. What we lost was not just a knife, it was a handshake between grocer and customer, sealed with a slice of proof. Number 10, the grafting and budding knife. Every nurseryman, orchardist, and county extension agent in 1955 carried one, and with it, he performed something close to surgery. The grafting knife had a thin, razor-flat blade for making the long, sloping cuts that joined scion to rootstock, and many carried a flat brass bark lifter on the spine for peeling bark back during summer budding. A skilled budder could set 2,000 buds a day, each one a 2-second operation. T-cut, lift, slip the bud in, wrap. His knife cost about $1 to $25, and he sharpened it to a polish because a ragged cut meant a dead graft, and a dead graft meant a lost tree and a lost season. Whole industries balanced on this blade. Every navel orange in California, Every named apple variety in Washington existed because a man with a grafting knife copied it by hand, tree by tree. The knives still exist, and grafting still happens, but the roadside nursery run by a man who could bud a row of peach seedlings before lunch gave way to consolidated wholesale operations, and the grafting knife left the American pocket and retreated into the specialist's kit. In 1955, it was as common in farm country as a fountain pen. Number 9, the paperhanger's knife. The post-war decade papered America. New subdivisions went up by the 100,000, and wallpaper was the fashionable finish, which meant an army of paperhangers, and every one of them carried a knife with a long, flexible blade honed like a razor. Wallpaper in 1955 often came with untrimmed selvage edges, and the hanger trimmed them by hand on a straight edge, then trimmed each hung strip at ceiling and baseboard with a single flowing stroke. The blade had to flex against the wall and cut wet paper without tearing it, which is a nearly impossible demand, and hangers stropped their knives constantly, some touching the edge after every single cut. A journeyman's knife, kit, and brushes were his livelihood, and paper hangers guarded their blades the way barbers guarded razors. Then taste changed. Paint took over in the 60s. Pre-trim papers eliminated selvage work, and the snap blade utility knife finished the argument by making a fresh razor edge cost a penny. The paper hangers union shrank, the trade folded into general painting, and the flexible trimming knife that finished a million living rooms became one more unidentifiable blade in the flea market bin. Number 8, the cable splicer's knife. Now for the aristocrats of the utility world. In 1955, the telephone network ran on cables sheathed in lead, and the men who joined them, Bell System cable splicers, were considered the elite of the outside plant. Their knife was a fixed blade, often from Klein Tools, with a stout, straight or hawksbill edge made for shaving and slitting lead sheath without nicking the paper insulated wires beneath. A splicer worked aloft in a canvas tent slung on the strand, or down in a manhole, boiling solder pot beside him, opening the sheath, joining hundreds of hair-fine pairs by hand, then wiping a molten lead sleeve over the joint with a pad. The knife opened the way for all of it. Splicers filed and reshaped their blades to personal patterns, and a man's knife marked him as trade royalty, the way a conductor's watch once did. Plastic insulated cable arrived in the 50s and 60s, lead work faded, modular connectors replaced hand splicing, and eventually fiber optics ended the craft entirely. The Klein Splicer's knife survives in catalogs, mostly unchanged, bought now by electricians who have no idea their blade was designed for a trade that no longer exists. Number 7, the rigging knife. Merchant sailors, longshoremen, riggers, and tugboat men carried the most safety-minded knife on this list. The rigging knife paired a sheepsfoot blade, flat-edged with no point, with a folding marlin spike, and the missing point was the whole idea. On a pitching deck, a man cutting a fouled line has no business holding a stabbing point, and ship's officers historically snapped the points off crew knives to make sure. The sheepsfoot sliced rope cleanly under full body weight, and the marlin spike loosened swollen knots, opened shackles, and served as a lever for splicing wire and manila. During the war, government contract rigging knives went out by the 100,000, and in 1955, the docks and the merchant fleet still ran on them. A Camillus rigger cost around $2 and hung from a lanyard, so the sea could not claim it. Then containerization emptied the docks of men, synthetic line replaced manila, and the great longshore gangs of New York and San Francisco shrank to a fraction. The rigging knife retreated to sailboats and yacht chandleries, where weekend sailors now buy stainless versions of a tool their grandfathers bet their fingers on. Number 6, the camp knife. Ask a veteran of the 1950s job site what he carried, and odds are it was this: the 4-blade utility pattern, spear blade, can opener, screwdriver, and cap lifter, punch all, the same knife issued to millions of GIS and stamped by Camillus, Ulster, and Imperial. Surveyors carried it, utility crews carried it, men who ate lunch out of a can beside a half-built highway carried it, because in 1955 cans did not have pull tabs and thermoses did not open themselves. The can opener blade alone justified the knife. It walked around a can of beans in 15 seconds. The screwdriver tightened a loose plate on anything. The awl started screw holes and punched leather, and the spear blade did the honest cutting. Army surplus flooded the country after the war, and a man could buy a genuine issue knife for under $1 at any surplus store, which made it possibly the most widely carried working knife in post-war America. The pull tab, the cordless driver, and the multi-tool each took a bite out of it, and by the 1980s it was a Boy Scout item. But for one generation, the whole American lunch break swung on that little folding can opener. Number 5, the trapper. 2 long blades, 1 clip point for fine work, 1 spay blade for skinning, folded into a handle built for gloved hands. The trapper pattern earned its name honestly. In 1955, fur was still real money in rural America, and a boy running a muskrat line before school could earn more than his father's overtime. A prime muskrat pelt brought a couple of dollars, mink far more, and the trapper knife did the delicate work of skinning without puncturing, the spade blades blunt tip gliding between hide and fat. Case, Schrade, and Camillus sold trappers by the trainload across the farm belt, priced around $2.50 to $3, and farmers who never set a trap carried them anyway, because 2 full-length blades meant one could stay razor sharp for clean work while the other did the dirty jobs. The fur market slid through the 60s and collapsed in the 80s as tastes and prices turned, and the trap line as a rural rite of passage faded out. The trapper survives as a beloved collector pattern made in bright bone handles for display cases. In 1955, it was made for blood, cold water, and 5 a.m., and it did that work in a million frozen creek bottoms. Number 4, the TL-29 electrician's knife. Here's the knife from the top of the video. The Army Signal Corps designed the TL-29 for field linemen, 2 blades, a spear master blade, and a screwdriver blade with a scraper edge and a liner lock so it could not fold shut on your knuckles while you torqued a terminal screw. After the war, surplus TL-29s hit the market for as little as 50 cents, and American electricians adopted it as if it had been designed for them, because it had been. The screwdriver blade locked open, stripped wire, scraped insulation, tightened lugs, and pried open junction boxes. The master blade cut everything else. Paired with a set of lineman's pliers, the TL-29 wired the entire post-war suburban expansion, tract by tract, panel by panel. Every electrical apprentice bought one his first week, and journeymen could identify each other by the worn TL-29 pouch on the belt. Purpose-built wire strippers, insulated screwdrivers, and eventually job site rules against pocket knives pushed it out of the trade through the 70s and 80s. Klein still makes a version today, but ask a young electrician what a TL-29 is, and you will get a shrug for the knife that electrified America. Number 3, the Stockman. 3 blades and 1 handle, a clip point for general work, a sheep's foot for straight controlled cuts, a spee for delicate ones. The Stockman was born on the cattle ranch, and in 1955, it was still the working end of the livestock business, castrating, docking, cutting twine, trimming hooves, opening feed sacks, all with the right blade for each job riding in one pocket. But the stockman broke out of the ranch and became the thinking man's work knife everywhere. Carpenters liked the sheep's foot for cutting to a line. Plumbers liked the clip for reaming and scraping. Foremen liked having 3 fresh edges between sharpenings. A case stockman cost around $3.50, nearly 2 hours' wages for a tradesman, and men bought them anyway and carried them for 30 years. A stockman was a serious purchase, often a gift marking a boy's first real job, handed over with a lecture about keeping it sharp and keeping it clean. It never fully vanished, and collectors keep the pattern alive in every handle material imaginable. But the sight of a stockman coming out of a work pocket, opened to the correct blade without the owner even looking down, belongs to another America. Number 2, the jackknife. The plainest entry on this list was also the biggest seller. The 2-blade jack, one large blade and one small pen blade hinged at the same end, was the default American pocket knife, sold in more hardware stores than any hammer, and stamped out by Imperial, Colonial, and Camillus in numbers that ran into the tens of millions. It cost anywhere from 49 cents to $2, and it was simply assumed on a man's person the way a wallet was. Machinists deburred with it, painters opened cans with it, farmers dug splinters, cut plugs of tobacco, and dressed graphs with it. When a stranger on a job site said, "Got a knife?" the answer was always yes, and it was always a jack. Schools did not blink at boys carrying them. A pocket knife was standard equipment for a paper route or a scout meeting. What killed the everyday jack was not one invention, but a slow cultural turn. Utility knives on the job, rules and metal detectors off it, and the quiet death of the assumption that a man carries a knife. The jackknife did not vanish from stores, it vanished from pockets, which is a lonelier way to go. And finally, number 1, the Barlow. If American work knives have a king, it wears a plain iron crown. The Barlow pattern is 300 years old. One long bolster to survive abuse, a teardrop handle, a clip or spear master blade, and a small pen blade, sold for around $1. Mark Twain put a genuine Barlow in Tom Sawyer and called it a real Barlow, because even in the 1870s, the name meant honest value. And by 1955, nothing had changed. The Barlow was a boy's first knife and a working man's last one. It whittled, stripped, cut, scraped, and pried its way through every trade in the country. And because it cost $1, it went everywhere without worry. Down wells, up scaffolds, into engine bays. Grandfathers handed Barlows to grandsons as a rite of passage, usually with the same speech about never cutting toward yourself. And those dollar knives are now the ones families refuse to sell at any price. The pattern outlived the empires that made it. Russell went, Camillus went, Imperial went, and the Barlow is still made today by boutique makers charging $200 for what the milkman carried loose in his pocket with his change. So here is my challenge. Go find the knife, your grandfather's toolbox, your father's dresser drawer, the coffee can in the garage. Somewhere in your family there is a worn blade with a story in its shape, and I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments what he carried and what trade wore it down, because I want to know if the TL-29 men outnumber the Stockman men. These knives were not just steel, they were the working identity of a generation, retired one pocket at a time. Your grandfather knew his knife, now you know it too.